The gunshot echoed through the dusty street of Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, 1889, as Savannah Gibson ducked behind an overturned wagon. Her heart pounded against her ribs while bullets splintered the wood around her. This wasn't how she'd imagined her first day in the frontier town would end, pinned down by outlaws after witnessing a bank robbery gone wrong. "You ain't getting away, missy," a gruff voice called. "You saw too much." Savannah clutched her satchel tighter, feeling the weight of her life savings inside. She'd come west with dreams of opening a dress shop, not dying in the dirt of some lawless town. The bustled skirt of her traveling dress was already torn and soiled, her chestnut hair falling from its careful arrangement as sweat beaded on her brow. Another bullet whistled past, too close for comfort. In desperation, she glanced around for an escape route and spotted an alley between the general store and the saloon, if she could just reach it. Taking a deep breath, Savannah prepared to make a run for it when hoofbeats thundered down the street. 3 riders appeared, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons," a commanding voice ordered. The outlaws hesitated only a moment before turning their guns toward the newcomers. The air erupted with gunfire. Savannah pressed herself closer to the wagon, covering her ears against the deafening noise. When silence finally fell, she cautiously peered around her shelter. 2 of the outlaws lay motionless in the street while the third was mounted on his horse, hands raised in surrender as one of the riders kept him covered. The tallest of the riders dismounted and approached her hiding place. Savannah's breath caught as she took in the sight of him, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in well-worn denim and leather, a silver star pinned to his vest. "Madam, you all right?" he asked, crouching down beside the wagon. His eyes were the color of a summer sky set in a sun-weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. I think so," she managed, her voice trembling. He offered her a calloused hand. "Name's Henry Decker. I'm the sheriff here in Kingfisher. Those men won't trouble you anymore." Savannah placed her fingers in his, feeling strength and unexpected gentleness in his grip as he helped her to her feet. "Savannah Gibson," she replied. "I just arrived on the afternoon stage." "Quite a welcome to our town, Miss Gibson," Sheriff Decker said, his expression grim. "I apologize for that. Kingfisher's usually peaceful, but these fellas have been causing trouble all through the territory." "Sheriff," one of the other riders called. "Wilson here says there's 2 more of their gang at the saloon." Henry Decker's jaw tightened. "Get him secured, then meet me there." He turned back to Savannah. "Madam, I need to see to this. The hotel's just down the street should be safe now. I'll come check on you later." Before she could respond, he was striding toward his horse, purpose in every step. Savannah watched him go, still shaking from her ordeal but finding an unexpected steadiness in the sheriff's confident demeanor. Little did she know that this chance meeting would change the course of both their lives forever. 2 hours later, Savannah sat on the edge of the narrow bed in her hotel room, staring at the worn floorboards. The events of the day replayed in her mind: the journey from St. Louis, her excitement upon arriving in Kingfisher, and then the terrifying moments during the shootout. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Gibson, it's Sheriff Decker." Savannah smoothed her skirts and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear before opening the door. Sheriff Decker stood in the hallway, hat in hand, his expression concerned. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right after everything." "As well as can be expected, I suppose," she replied, gesturing for him to enter. Propriety demanded she leave the door open for appearance's sake, which she did. "Were you able to apprehend the other outlaws?" Henry nodded, stepping just inside the doorway. "We got them. The Barton gang won't be troubling Oklahoma Territory anymore." He studied her face. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings you to Kingfisher? Not many single ladies venture out this way alone." Savannah lifted her chin. "I'm opening a dress shop. I was a seamstress back in St. Louis, but I wanted something of my own." She gestured to the large trunk in the corner. "I've brought patterns and fabrics to start. I've arranged to rent the vacant storefront next to the mercantile." Surprise and something like admiration flickered across his face. That's ambitious. Is that your way of saying foolish? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. He smiled then, and the transformation in his serious face was remarkable. Not at all, Miss Gibson. Kingfisher could use more enterprising folks like yourself. The town's growing fast since the land run last month, so I've heard. That's why I chose to come here. Savannah hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Sheriff, for earlier. I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't arrived when you did." Henry shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just doing my job, madam." He put his hat back on. "If you need anything while you're getting settled, my office is across from the bank." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and the Ladies' Aid Society meets on Tuesdays at the church. Might be a good way to meet potential customers." "I appreciate the suggestion," Savannah said, touched by his thoughtfulness. After Sheriff Decker left, Savannah found herself standing at the window, watching his tall figure cross the street toward the sheriff's office. There was something compelling about the man, a quiet strength that made her feel safe despite the danger she'd faced today. She shook her head at such foolish thoughts. She'd come to Kingfisher with a clear purpose to establish herself as an independent businesswoman. Romance had no place in those plans, especially with a man who faced danger daily. She'd already lost too much to violence back east. But as she unpacked her trunk, preparing for tomorrow's work of setting up her shop, Sheriff Henry Decker's blue eyes kept appearing in her mind. Over the next 3 weeks, Savannah threw herself into establishing Gibson's fine apparel. The storefront required considerable cleaning and repair, but she worked from sunrise to sunset, determined to make it presentable. To her surprise, several townspeople offered help. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house brought her lunch daily. Mr. Collins from the mercantile extended credit for supplies, and even the blacksmith fashioned display racks for her at cost. Sheriff Decker made regular appearances as well, often stopping by on his daily rounds. He never stayed long, but his visits became something Savannah looked forward to more than she cared to admit. One afternoon, as she struggled with a heavy shelf, the bell above the door jingled and Henry stepped inside. "Need a hand with that?" he asked, immediately moving to take the weight from her arms. "Thank you," Savannah said, stepping back as he easily lifted the shelf into place. "It seems I'm forever thanking you for rescuing me." Henry secured the shelf to the wall. "Glad to help. Town's been peaceful lately, gives me time for more pleasant duties." His eyes met hers briefly before he looked away, a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. Savannah busied herself arranging spools of ribbon, acutely aware of his presence. At 32, Henry Decker was considered a confirmed bachelor in Kingfisher. Rumor had it he'd once been engaged to a girl back east, but something had happened to end it. Whatever the case, he kept mostly to himself when not performing his duties. "Shop's coming along nicely," he observed, looking around at the transformed space. "When do you plan to open?" "This Saturday, if all goes well," Savannah replied. "I've already had several ladies stop by to inquire about dressmaking services." She hesitated, then added, "There's to be a social at the church Saturday evening. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it might be good for business if I attended." Henry nodded. "Those events are popular. Folks don't get many chances for socializing out here." An awkward silence fell between them. Savannah found herself wishing he would offer to escort her, but of course that would be inappropriate. They barely knew each other after all. "Well," Henry said finally, replacing his hat, "I should continue my rounds. Good luck with the opening, Miss Gibson." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, hiding her disappointment behind a polite smile. After he left, Savannah chided herself for her foolishness. Henry Decker was simply being kind to a newcomer, nothing more. She needed to focus on making her business successful, not daydreaming about a man who'd shown no romantic interest in her. Yet later that night, as she stitched the finishing touches on a new dress to wear to the social, she couldn't help wondering if the sheriff might be there too. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for Gibson's fine apparel's grand opening. Savannah had spent hours arranging her displays of ready-made items, delicate handkerchiefs, lace collars, and several completed dresses that showcased her skills. A table near the window displayed fabric samples and pattern books for custom orders. By mid-morning, the small shop was filled with curious women, examining her wares and chatting excitedly. Mrs. Patterson had spread the word effectively, and Savannah found herself taking orders for everything from everyday work dresses to a wedding gown for the banker's daughter. "Your timing is providential, Miss Gibson," declared Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife. "With the harvest dance coming next month, every lady in town needs something new to wear." By closing time, Savannah's account book showed a promising start, and she hurried back to her rented room to prepare for the social. The dress she'd made was simpler than the elaborate fashions she'd once worn in St. Louis, but the deep emerald cotton suited her coloring, and the cut was flattering without being too daring for frontier sensibilities. As she walked toward the church that evening, Savannah felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. This would be her first real opportunity to meet the townspeople in a social setting, to establish herself as part of the community rather than just a newcomer. The church hall was decorated with paper streamers and wildflowers, lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. A small band played in one corner and tables laden with food lined one wall. Savannah took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Miss Gibson, over here, Mrs." Patterson waved from across the room, and Savannah made her way toward her, returning greetings from those she passed. "Let me introduce you properly," the older woman said, taking Savannah's arm and leading her through the crowd. What followed was a whirl of names and faces: the doctor and his wife, the banker, the schoolteacher, ranchers and farmers and shopkeepers and their families. Throughout it all, Savannah found her gaze drifting toward the door, watching for a tall figure in a sheriff's badge. But as the evening wore on and Henry didn't appear, she forced herself to focus on the conversations around her. "Sheriff Decker won't be joining us tonight," Mrs. Patterson said suddenly, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "He rode out to the Simmons Ranch this afternoon, some trouble with cattle rustlers." "Oh," Savannah said, hoping her disappointment wasn't obvious. "That's unfortunate. For the social, I mean." Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Henry's a good man, but his duty always comes first. That's part of what makes him such a fine sheriff, though it hasn't made for much of a personal life." Before Savannah could respond to this rather pointed observation, a young cowboy approached and asked her to dance. Etiquette demanded she accept, and soon she was being whirled around the floor to a lively tune. Other partners followed, and Savannah found herself enjoying the evening despite Henry's absence. It was nearly midnight when the social began winding down. Savannah was helping to clear away the refreshments when the door opened and Henry Decker entered. He looked tired, his clothes dusty from the trail, but his eyes brightened when they found her. "Sheriff," Mrs. Patterson greeted him, "we'd given up hope of seeing you tonight." "Got back sooner than expected," he replied, then turned to Savannah. "Evening, Miss Gibson. I hear your shop opening was a success." "It was indeed," she said, suddenly very conscious of her appearance after hours of dancing. "How was your business at the Simmons Ranch?" A shadow crossed his face. "Complicated. Could I trouble you for some of that coffee if there's any left?" Mrs. Patterson tactfully busied herself elsewhere while Savannah poured him a cup. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. Henry sighed, taking a sip of the coffee. "Just tired. Been tracking those rustlers for days. Thought we had them cornered, but they slipped away." He looked at her more closely. "You look nice, Miss Gibson. That color suits you." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. I made it myself, of course." "Of course," he agreed with a slight smile. "I'm sorry I missed most of the social. I had hoped." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Never mind. It's late and you must be tired after your busy day. May I walk you back to your boarding house?" Savannah accepted gratefully, saying her goodbyes to the remaining guests. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the streets of Kingfisher quiet except for muted piano music drifting from the saloon. They walked in companionable silence for a while before Henry spoke. "I've been meaning to ask, how did you come to be a dressmaker?" Savannah considered how much to tell him. "My father was a banker in St. Louis. We lived comfortably until the Panic of '73. He lost everything and took his own life." She felt Henry's gaze on her but continued. "My mother and I were left with nothing but debts. She had always been skilled with a needle, so she took in sewing to support us. I learned from her." "I'm sorry," Henry said softly. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Savannah acknowledged. "Mother died of consumption 3 years ago. Afterward, I decided I needed a fresh start somewhere new. When I heard about the opportunities in Oklahoma Territory after the land run, it seemed like providence." Henry nodded. "Many folks come here for a second chance, myself included." This revelation surprised her. "You weren't always a lawman." "No," he said, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I was studying law back in Boston when the war came. Joined up with the Union Army, served 4 years. Afterward, well, the man who went to war wasn't the same one who came home. Couldn't settle back into city life, drifted west, tried my hand at ranching, then fell into peacekeeping." They had reached the boarding house. Savannah paused at the steps, reluctant for their conversation to end. "Thank you for walking me home, Sheriff." "Henry," he said. "When I'm not wearing the badge, I'd prefer if you called me Henry." "Henry," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Savannah," he smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Good night, Savannah. I'm glad you've come to Kingfisher." As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Savannah realized with sudden clarity that she was in danger of falling for Sheriff Henry Decker. And that complicated everything. Summer progressed into early autumn, and Savannah's business flourished beyond her expectations. Word of her skill with a needle spread throughout the county, bringing customers from neighboring towns and outlying ranches. She hired 2 assistant sisters from a nearby farm who were eager to learn dressmaking and expanded her offerings to include millinery. Her friendship with Henry deepened as well, though neither of them acknowledged the current of attraction that ran beneath their interactions. He continued his daily visits to her shop, sometimes bringing her news of the town or territory, other times simply sitting quietly while she worked, comfortable in each other's presence. On a warm September afternoon, Savannah was just closing the shop when Henry arrived, his expression unusually serious. "I need to speak with you," he said without preamble. "Would you walk with me?" Concerned by his demeanor, Savannah quickly locked the door and fell into step beside him. He led her toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie dotted with late summer wildflowers. "What is it?" she finally asked when he remained silent. "Has something happened?" Henry stopped, turning to face her. "I received a telegram today from the marshal in Fort Smith. They've captured the last 2 members of the Barton gang, the men who shot at you when you first arrived." "That's good news, isn't it?" Savannah asked, confused by his gravity. "Yes, but—" Henry removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "They're being brought to trial next month. As a witness to their attempted robbery, you'll be called to testify." Savannah felt a chill despite the warm day. "I have to go to Fort Smith." "No," Henry said quickly. "The judge is coming here. Judge Parker's circuit includes Oklahoma Territory now. But it means facing those men again, telling what you saw in open court." "I see," Savannah said quietly, understanding his concern. The memory of that terrifying day still occasionally haunted her dreams. "When?" 3 weeks from now." Henry stepped closer, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Savannah, I want you to know I'll be there the whole time. You won't face this alone." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you, Henry." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a decision made or a barrier falling away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, he raised his free hand to her cheek. "Savannah," he said, her name almost a whisper on his lips. I've been trying to keep my distance to be professional, but I can't pretend anymore. These past months getting to know you, you've become very important to me." Her heart hammered in her chest. Henry, a shout from the direction of town interrupted whatever she might have said. They both turned to see one of Henry's deputies running toward them. "Sheriff, fire at the livery stable." Henry's expression hardened instantly, the lawman replacing the man. "Stay here," he told Savannah, already moving toward town. "I'll come find you later." Savannah watched him go, the moment between them broken but not forgotten. As smoke began to rise in the distance, she gathered her skirts and hurried back toward town. Henry might have told her to stay put, but she wasn't going to sit idle while Kingfisher was in danger. By the time she reached the main street, chaos had erupted. The livery stable was fully engulfed in flames, the fire threatening to spread to neighboring buildings. Men formed a bucket brigade from the town well, while others worked to free the panicked horses from the burning structure. Savannah spotted Henry directing the effort, his voice cutting through the confusion with clear commands. She joined a group of women helping to fill buckets, her fine dress soon soaked and smudged with soot. For 2 hours, the town battled the blaze. Savannah lost track of Henry in the commotion, focused on the endless task of hauling water. Finally, as dusk fell, the fire was brought under control. The livery stable was a total loss, but the surrounding buildings had been saved. Exhausted, Savannah sat on a bench outside the general store, watching as the townspeople began to disperse. The fire had been contained, but the work of clearing debris and rebuilding would take weeks. "You didn't stay where I asked." She looked up to find Henry standing before her, face blackened with smoke, his shirt torn where embers had burned through the fabric. "I couldn't," she said simply. "Not when everyone needed help." Something like pride flickered in his eyes. He sat heavily beside her on the bench, wincing slightly. "You're hurt," Savannah said, noticing the way he favored his left side. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "A beam fell. Doc says it's just bruised ribs." Without thinking, she reached out to touch his face, her fingers coming away streaked with soot. "You could have been killed." "Part of the job," he said, but caught her hand before she could withdraw it. "Savannah, about what I was saying earlier." "Not now," she interrupted gently. "You need rest and care for those ribs. We can talk tomorrow." He looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Tomorrow, then, promise me." "I promise," she said, helping him to his feet. "Now go let the doctor look at you properly." As she watched him walk away, Savannah realized that the feelings she'd been trying to ignore had grown too strong to deny. She was falling in love with Henry Decker, perhaps had already fallen, and tomorrow would change everything between them, one way or another. Sleep eluded Savannah that night. She tossed and turned, replaying Henry's words in her mind, imagining what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. By dawn, she had made her decision. Life on the frontier was too uncertain, too precious to waste on hesitation and propriety. If Henry truly cared for her as she did for him, she wouldn't let fear hold her back. She dressed with care in a blue calico dress that brought out the color of her eyes, pinning her hair in a simple but flattering style. The shop wouldn't open until noon, a concession to the previous day's exhaustion, giving her time to seek out Henry first. The sheriff's office was quiet when she arrived, the deputy on duty informing her that Henry had ridden out at first light to check on a ranch that had reported missing cattle. "Said he'd be back by midday, madam," the young man offered. "Want me to tell him you stopped by?" "No, thank you," Savannah replied, hiding her disappointment. "I'll speak with him later." She walked to her shop, focusing on work to distract herself from thoughts of Henry. The morning passed slowly, each jingle of the bell above the door making her heart leap with hope, only to fall again when it wasn't him. By mid-afternoon, concern began to replace disappointment. Henry was meticulous about his duties and his word. If he'd said he'd be back by midday, something must have delayed him. Just before closing time, the door opened and Deputy Collins entered, his expression grave. "Miss Gibson, Sheriff asked me to come speak with you." Savannah's hands stilled on the dress she was hemming. "What's happened? Is Henry all right?" "He's alive," the deputy said, which did nothing to calm her fears. "But he ran into trouble out at the Carson place. Seems those cattle rustlers he's been tracking ambushed him. He took a bullet in the shoulder before he managed to drive them off." Savannah's knees weakened and she gripped the counter for support. "How bad is it?" Doc's with him now at his house. Said it went clean through, but he lost a fair amount of blood. "Sheriff was conscious enough to ask me to tell you specifically not to worry." The deputy shuffled his feet awkwardly. "He, also said to tell you he hasn't forgotten about your conversation." Despite her fear, Savannah felt a rush of warmth at Henry's message. "Thank you, deputy. I'll close the shop immediately and go to him." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Doc said no visitors tonight. Sheriff needs rest." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "With all due respect, deputy, I don't consider myself a visitor. Please tell Dr. Henderson to expect me within the hour." Without waiting for a response, she began closing the shop, her movements swift and determined. Henry had been there for her from the moment she arrived in Kingfisher. She wouldn't leave him alone now, no matter what the doctor said. Henry's house stood at the edge of town, a modest but well-built structure with a small front porch. Savannah had passed it many times but had never been inside. Now, as she approached with a basket containing broth, fresh bread, and medical supplies, she felt a mix of determination and nervousness. Dr. Henderson opened the door at her knock, his expression shifting from irritation to resignation when he saw her. "Miss Gibson, I might have known. The sheriff's resting." "I won't disturb him," she promised. "I've brought supplies and food. Please, doctor." After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside. "Very well. But only because I need to return to my other patients." The bullet passed through his left shoulder, missing anything vital. "He's lost blood and there's risk of infection, but if fever doesn't set in, he should recover. I've left laudanum for the pain. Make sure he takes it." Savannah nodded, absorbing the instructions. "How long will you be gone?" "I'll return in the morning. If his condition worsens, especially if fever develops, send for me immediately." After the doctor left, Savannah took a moment to survey Henry's home. The main room was simply furnished but neat, with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and bookshelves filled with volumes that hinted at his educated background. A door stood ajar, revealing a bedroom beyond. Taking a deep breath, Savannah crossed to the bedroom doorway and peered inside. Henry lay on a narrow bed, his upper body bare except for bandages wrapped around his left shoulder and chest. His face was pale against the pillow, eyes closed in sleep or unconsciousness. Quietly, she placed her basket on a nearby table and approached the bed. "Henry," she called softly. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze before recognition dawned. "Savannah, what are you doing here?" "Taking care of you," she replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "How do you feel?" He attempted to sit up, wincing at the movement. "I've been better. You shouldn't be here, not proper." Savannah gently pressed him back against the pillows. "Propriety be damned, Henry Decker." "You've been shot." A weak smile touched his lips. "Never heard you curse before." "There are a lot of things you don't know about me," she said, reaching for a cup of water. "Here, drink this." He complied, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finished, he said, "You're beautiful when you're being stubborn." "And you're delirious from blood loss," she countered, though her cheeks warmed. "Dr. Henderson left laudanum for the pain." Henry shook his head. "Don't want it yet, makes my thoughts fuzzy." He caught her hand. "We never finished our talk yesterday." "That can wait until you're stronger," Savannah said, though her heart raced at his touch. "No," he insisted, his grip tightening slightly. "I've waited too long already. Savannah, when those bullets were flying today, all I could think about was you. About what I never got to tell you." She stilled, hearing the urgency in his voice. "I'm listening." Henry took a shaky breath. "I love you, Savannah Gibson. Have since that first day when you stood up from behind that wagon, covered in dust but dignified as any queen. I know I'm just a lawman with nothing much to offer except a dangerous job and a modest home," but Savannah silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips gently to his. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise and something like wonder. "I love you too, Henry," she whispered. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it was foolish to fall for a man who risks his life daily, but I can't deny it anymore." Joy transformed his features, making him look younger despite his pallor. He raised his good arm, his hand cupping her cheek. "I never thought, never dared hope." "Rest now," she said, seeing fatigue begin to overtake him. "I'll be here when you wake." His eyes drifted closed, but his fingers remained twined with hers. Savannah sat watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, her heart full of both fear and joy. She had found love in this frontier town, against all expectations. Now she just had to pray that Henry would recover completely. As darkness fell, she lit the lamps and settled into a chair beside the bed for a long night's vigil. The next week passed in a blur of activity for Savannah. By day, she managed her shop, keeping business running with the help of her assistants. Every evening she went to Henry's house, preparing meals, changing his bandages, and simply being with him as he regained his strength. The town buzzed with gossip about their arrangement, but Savannah found she cared little for opinions. Henry needed her, and that was all that mattered. Besides, Mrs. Patterson pointedly accompanied her each evening, providing a chaperone that somewhat appeased the more conservative townspeople. By the end of the week, Henry was able to sit up and move around the house, though Dr. Henderson insisted he avoid strenuous activity. His color had returned, and with it, his determination to resume his duties. "You're not going back to work yet," Savannah told him firmly one evening as she changed his bandage. "The deputies are managing fine." Henry grumbled but didn't argue. Instead, he caught her hand as she finished securing the clean dressing. "Marry me, Savannah." The abruptness of the proposal startled her. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I know this past week hasn't been conventional, but nothing about our relationship has been. I love you. I want to spend my life with you." Savannah's heart swelled with emotion, but caution made her hesitate. "Henry, you've been injured. This might be the laudanum talking. I haven't taken any laudanum since yesterday," he interrupted. "My mind is clear, Savannah. I've been thinking about this since long before I got shot." He shifted, wincing slightly at the movement. "Life out here is uncertain. I don't want to waste any more time pretending we aren't meant to be together." Tears welled in Savannah's eyes. "Are you sure? Being a lawman's wife, it won't be easy." "Being alone is harder," he said simply. "I can't promise I'll never be in danger again, but I can promise to love you every day I have on this earth." Savannah looked at this man who had captured her heart, strong yet gentle, dedicated to justice, yet capable of such tenderness. Whatever challenges they might face, she knew with sudden certainty that she wanted to face them together. "Yes," she said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Henry Decker." Joy transformed his features. He pulled her close with his good arm, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally parted, both breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Soon?" he asked. "I don't want a long engagement," Savannah laughed. "How soon did you have in mind?" "As soon as I can stand through the ceremony without falling over," he said with a grin. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, she agreed, just enough time to make a proper wedding dress. 2 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Savannah stood before the mirror in her rented room, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The wedding dress she'd created was simpler than those she'd sewn for wealthy clients in St. Louis, but in her eyes, it was perfect ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the skirt falling in graceful folds to brush the floor. Mrs. Patterson bustled around her, fussing with the veil. "You look beautiful, my dear. Sheriff Decker won't know what hit him." Savannah smiled, touching the small locket at her throat, her mother's, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept from her former life. "I still can't quite believe this is happening. 6 months ago, I arrived in Kingfisher alone and frightened. Now you're about to marry the most eligible bachelor in the county," Mrs. Patterson finished, her eyes twinkling. "And quite a love story it is, too. Why, the whole town's been talking about nothing else for weeks. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Patterson opened it to reveal Reverend Williams, who would be performing the ceremony. "It's time, Miss Gibson," he said with a kind smile. "Your groom is waiting, and I dare say he's nervous enough for both of you." Savannah took a deep breath, gathering her bouquet of late autumn wildflowers. "I'm ready." The walk to the church seemed both endless and too brief. Kingfisher had embraced this wedding as a community celebration. The streets were decorated with bunting, and townspeople nodded and smiled as the small procession passed. At the church steps, Savannah paused, momentarily overwhelmed. Her parents weren't here to see this day. She had no family to give her away. For a fleeting moment, doubt clouded her happiness. "Miss Gibson," Reverend Williams asked gently, "are you all right?" Savannah straightened her shoulders. She had made her own way in the world since her parents' deaths. Today was no different. She would walk into her future on her own terms. "I'm fine," she said. "Let's proceed." The church doors opened, and Savannah saw Henry standing at the altar, tall and handsome in a new black suit. His left arm was still held somewhat stiffly, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing him, but his face, when he turned and saw her, showed nothing but joy and love. Walking down that aisle, Savannah felt all her doubts fall away. This man, this place, this life, this was where she belonged. When she reached him, Henry took her hand, his grip steady and warm. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. "So are you," she replied, noting how the new suit emphasized his broad shoulders and the quiet strength that had first drawn her to him. Reverend Williams began the ceremony, his voice filling the small church with time-honored words about love and commitment. Savannah heard them as though from a distance, focused entirely on Henry's face, on the future they were building together. When it came time for the vows, Henry's voice rang clear and certain. "I, Henry Decker, take thee, Savannah Gibson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Savannah repeated the words, meaning everyone. This was no convenient arrangement or practical partnership. This was a marriage built on deep love and mutual respect. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Williams concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Henry's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, sealing their vows before God and the community of Kingfisher. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Decker, Savannah felt a surge of happiness unlike anything she'd experienced before. The celebration afterward was exuberant, a community potluck with music, dancing, and more food than the entire town could consume. Henry remained at Savannah's side throughout, his hand rarely leaving hers, as if he couldn't quite believe she was truly his wife. As the afternoon waned, they slipped away from the festivities to the house that was now their home. Henry had insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite his healing shoulder, setting her down carefully in the main room that Savannah had helped redecorate during his convalescence. "Welcome home, Mrs. Decker," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Savannah reached up to touch his face, still marveling that this man was her husband. "I love you, Henry." His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "And I love you more than I have words to express." Their kiss deepened, the restraint of the past weeks giving way to a new urgency. Henry's hands moved to the buttons at the back of her wedding dress, his fingers fumbling slightly. "Let me," Savannah whispered, reaching behind to help. The dress loosened, but she hesitated, suddenly shy despite their mutual desire. Henry sensed her uncertainty. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly. "There's no rush." Touched by his consideration, Savannah made her decision. With trembling fingers, she undid the remaining buttons and let the ivory silk slide from her shoulders, leaving her in her corset and petticoats. "I took it off. Please," she cried, her voice catching with emotion. "Don't make me brave alone." The rancher cowboy froze in shock at her vulnerability and beauty. For a moment, he simply stared, overwhelmed by the trust she placed in him. Then he made his move, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. "Never," he vowed, gathering her into his arms. "You'll never have to be brave alone again. Whatever comes, we face it together." As the last light of day faded into dusk, husband and wife discovered each other with tenderness and passion, their love transforming a simple frontier house into a sanctuary of shared dreams. The following weeks brought both joy and challenges as Henry and Savannah adjusted to married life. Henry returned to his duties as sheriff, though Savannah extracted a promise that he would be more careful and always take a deputy when investigating potential dangers. She continued running her dress shop, which thrived as winter approached and the women of Kingfisher required warmer clothing. Their evenings were precious quiet hours by the fire, sharing the events of their days, making plans for their future. Sometimes Henry read aloud from his collection of books while Savannah sewed, their domestic contentment a stark contrast to the dangers he sometimes faced by day. One evening in early December, Henry returned home with a troubled expression that immediately caught Savannah's attention. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her needlework. Henry removed his gun belt and hung it by the door, a ritual he performed each night. "Judge Parker's court will be in session next week. The Barton trial is set for Tuesday." Savannah's stomach tightened. With the joy of their wedding and the rhythm of their new life together, she had almost forgotten about her obligation to testify. "I see." Henry crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it to take her hands in his. "You don't have to do this if it's too difficult." "I can speak to the judge, no," Savannah interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "Those men tried to kill me. They've hurt others too. I won't let fear stop me from doing what's right." Pride shone in Henry's eyes. "Have I told you lately how much I admire your courage?" "It's not courage," she replied, squeezing his hands. "It's knowing you'll be there with me. Always," he promised, rising to kiss her forehead. "Now I have some happier news too. Remember that parcel of land outside town we looked at last month, the one with the creek running through it?" Savannah nodded. They had ridden past it on a Sunday outing, and she had commented on how perfect it would be for a home someday close enough to town for both their work, but with enough space for a proper garden and perhaps even a few animals. "I spoke to Mr. Jenkins at the bank today," Henry continued, a smile spreading across his face. "The deed is ours. Consider it an early Christmas gift." Savannah gasped, jumping to her feet. "Henry, how did you manage it? Been saving since before we met," he admitted. "Always wanted land of my own someday, and now that I have you." He shrugged, suddenly looking boyish. "I want to build you a proper home, Savannah, one big enough for a family if that's what you want." Tears filled Savannah's eyes as she wrapped her arms around her husband's neck. "It's perfect. It's everything I want." As they held each other in their small rented house, plans for their future home mingled with the more immediate concern of the upcoming trial. Life in the frontier was ever thus joy and danger, hope and fear, all woven together into the tapestry of their shared existence. The day of the trial dawned cold and clear, a light dusting of snow covering Kingfisher. Savannah dressed with care in a conservative navy blue dress of her own making, her hair neatly arranged beneath a matching hat. Henry, in his official capacity as sheriff, had left earlier to oversee security at the courthouse. As Savannah walked through town, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her. Word of her testimony had spread, and the citizens of Kingfisher were divided between concern for her well-being and eagerness for the drama of a trial. The courthouse was packed when she arrived, the crowd parting silently to let her through. Henry waited at the front, his expression professional but his eyes conveying all the love and support she needed. Beside him sat Judge Parker, stern-faced and imposing in his black robes. And there, under heavy guard, were the men from the Barton gang, the ones who had shot at her on her first day in Kingfisher. They looked smaller somehow, less threatening in custody than they had when firing wildly in the street, But Savannah still felt a chill when one of them met her gaze with undisguised hatred. "All rise," called the bailiff, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, outlining the gang's crimes across the territory. When Savannah's turn came to testify, she took the oath with a steady hand on the Bible, then answered the questions clearly and truthfully. Throughout, she kept her eyes either on the prosecutor or on Henry, refusing to give the defendants the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. When the defense attorney rose to cross-examine her, his approach was aggressive, clearly hoping to rattle her. "Miss Gibson, excuse me, Mrs. Decker, how convenient that you married the sheriff who arrested these men. One might almost suspect collusion." Murmurs ran through the courtroom at this insinuation. Henry's jaw tightened, but before he could object, Judge Parker intervened. "That will be quite enough, counselor. Confine your questions to the events at issue." The attorney changed tactics. "You claim you saw my clients clearly, yet it was your first day in town. You were frightened, bullets were flying. How can you be so certain of their identities?" Savannah met his gaze evenly. "Sir, when men are shooting at you, their faces tend to make an impression. I will never forget what these men look like or what they did that day." Her calm response seemed to unnerve the attorney, who soon concluded his questioning. As Savannah stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a profound sense of relief, not just that her testimony was over, but that she had faced her fear and prevailed. The trial continued for 2 more days, with other witnesses taking the stand. When the jury finally returned their verdict guilty on all counts, Savannah sat beside Henry in the crowded courtroom, her hand clasped tightly in his. Judge Parker's sentence was harsh but just: 20 years in the federal prison at Fort Smith for each man. As the convicted outlaws were led away, one of them turned to spit in Savannah's direction, only to be roughly restrained by the guards. "You'll pay for this," he snarled. "Both of you." Henry was on his feet instantly, his hand on his gun, but the prisoner was already being dragged from the courtroom. In the silence that followed, Judge Parker's gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. Outside, in the cold December air, Henry pulled Savannah close. "It's over," he said. "They can't hurt anyone anymore." But Savannah had seen the hatred in that man's eyes, and a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather settled in her bones. "Will we ever truly be safe, Henry?" He didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, he kissed her gently. "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect what we're building together." It was enough. It had to be. This was the reality of the life they'd chosen, moments of danger alongside the everyday joys of love and work and community. As they walked home together through the snowy streets of Kingfisher, Savannah resolved to focus on the future they were creating rather than the threats of the past. Spring arrived in Oklahoma Territory with explosive green growth and wildflowers carpeting the prairie. On their land outside town, the framework of Henry and Savannah's new house rose steadily, built with the help of friends and neighbors in the time-honored tradition of frontier communities. Savannah had designed the house herself, a comfortable 2-story structure with a wide front porch, large windows to catch the breeze, and enough bedrooms for the family they hoped to have. Henry had insisted on a stone fireplace like the one in their rented house, where they had spent so many contented evenings during their first months of marriage. On a warm April morning, Savannah stood watching as the last roof beam was set in place. Henry and several other men balanced precariously on the structure, hammering and calling directions to those below. The scene filled her with both pride and anxiety: pride in what they were creating, anxiety for Henry's safety, even in this ordinary task. Mrs. Patterson, who had come to help provide lunch for the workers, noticed her expression. "Don't fret so, dear. Men have been building houses since the beginning of time." "I know," Savannah sighed. "I just can't seem to stop worrying about him, especially since." She trailed off, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat abdomen. She hadn't told Henry yet wanted to be absolutely certain before sharing the news that would change their lives again. But Mrs. Patterson was too observant to miss the gesture. Her eyes widened. Savannah Decker. "Are you in the family way?" Savannah blushed but couldn't contain her smile. "Dr. Henderson confirmed it yesterday. We're expecting a baby in late November." The older woman enveloped her in a warm embrace. "Oh, my dear, what wonderful news. Henry will be over the moon." "I plan to tell him tonight," Savannah said, her gaze returning to her husband as he climbed down from the roof frame. "I want everything to be perfect." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. "Trust me, child, the news itself will be perfect enough." That evening, after the workers had gone and they had the construction site to themselves, Savannah and Henry walked through the skeleton of their future home. The setting sun cast long shadows through the open framework, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber and spring blossoms. "It's really taking shape," Henry said, his arm around her waist as they stood in what would become their bedroom. "We should be able to move in by midsummer." Savannah leaned into his embrace, just in time. "For what?" Taking a deep breath, she turned to face him. "For the baby to have a proper nursery. Henry, I'm pregnant." For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then, as her words registered, joy transformed his features. With a whoop that startled nearby birds into flight, he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a careful circle. "A baby," he exclaimed, setting her down gently. "Our baby, when? How long have you known? Are you feeling all right?" Laughing at his barrage of questions, Savannah placed her hands on his chest to calm him. "November, according to Dr. Henderson. I only found out for certain yesterday. And yes, I feel fine, a little tired in the afternoons, but otherwise well." Henry's hand moved to cover hers, his expression softening into wonder. "A family of our own," he murmured. "Savannah, I never thought I could be this happy." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the prairie sky in shades of gold and pink, husband and wife stood amid the beginnings of their home, dreaming of the child who would complete their family. In that moment, the hardships of frontier life, the dangers of Henry's profession, even the lingering threat of the Barton gang all seemed distant and inconsequential compared to the miracle growing within Savannah's womb. Summer arrived with scorching heat that tested even the hardiest Oklahoma settlers. Savannah's pregnancy progressed well, though she found herself tiring more easily in the oppressive temperatures. The dress shop remained busy, but she gradually delegated more responsibilities to her assistants, preparing for the time when the baby would need her full attention. Their new house was completed in July, a milestone celebrated with another community gathering. As friends and neighbors helped move their belongings from town to the new homestead, Savannah felt a deep sense of contentment. The house was everything she had envisioned, practical yet beautiful, with personal touches that made it uniquely theirs. Henry had built bookshelves to hold his growing collection, installed a special corner in the kitchen where Savannah could work on dress designs, and most touchingly, crafted a cradle for their expected child, carved with intricate patterns of prairie wildflowers. By September, Savannah's condition was unmistakable, her dresses altered to accommodate her changing figure. Henry became increasingly protective, insisting on driving her to the shop each morning and bringing her home in the afternoon, despite her good-natured protests that she wasn't an invalid. "I'm just taking care of my family," he would reply, his hand gently resting on her rounded belly. The baby was active, especially in the evenings when Savannah and Henry sat on their front porch watching the sunset. "I think we have a future lawman on our hands," Savannah joked one night after a particularly vigorous series of kicks. "Always on patrol." Henry laughed, but his eyes held a shadow that Savannah had come to recognize. "Or perhaps a dressmaker," he countered. "Either way, I hope for an easier life than mine." Savannah took his hand. "Are you still thinking about giving up the badge?" It was a conversation they'd had several times since learning of the pregnancy. Henry's role as sheriff, while respected, came with undeniable dangers. The memory of his gunshot wound was still fresh for both of them. More and more, he admitted. Kingfisher's growing, the wild days are mostly behind us. Maybe it's time for someone younger to take on the responsibility. What would you do instead? She asked, curious rather than concerned. Henry was skilled in many ways he would never lack for work. He gestured toward their land, where he had begun cultivating a vegetable garden and keeping a few chickens and a milk cow. Expand this. Maybe buy more land, raise some cattle. I always wanted to be a rancher before I pinned on this star. Savannah could see it, Henry working the land, building something lasting, coming home each night without the weight of a gun on his hip or the responsibility for others' safety on his shoulders. I think you'd be wonderful at it, she said sincerely. He kissed her then, a tender affirmation of their shared dream. After the baby comes, he decided, I'll speak to the mayor about finding a replacement in the spring. As October painted the prairie in russet and gold, Savannah's world narrowed to preparations for the baby's arrival. The cradle was placed in their bedroom, tiny garments were sewn and stored in a cedar chest, and Mrs. Patterson began instructing her in the mysteries of infant care. Henry spent his free time finishing projects around the house and property, building a more substantial chicken coop, reinforcing the barn, installing additional locks on doors and windows. Savannah recognized these efforts for what they were. A man's way of protecting his family when faced with the uncontrollable event of childbirth. Everything's ready, he announced one evening in early November, joining her by the fire where she sat knitting a small blanket. The house is secure, we have supplies for winter, and I've arranged for Deputy Collins to take over most of my duties for the next few weeks. Savannah smiled, touched by his thoroughness. And Dr. Henderson knows to expect our summons any day now, Henry confirmed, sitting beside her. Mrs. Patterson has promised to come stay with us when the time comes. We're as prepared as we can be. Yet all their careful planning couldn't account for the vagaries of fate. 3 days later, while Henry was in town attending to sheriff's business, Savannah felt the first pains of labor begin a full 2 weeks earlier than Dr. Henderson had predicted. She was alone in the house, having insisted she was well enough for Henry to complete his duties. At first, she tried to dismiss the discomfort as practice contractions, but as the intensity increased, she realized with growing alarm that the baby was truly coming. With no way to send for help, their nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Savannah focused on remaining calm. She had assisted at enough births in Kingfisher to understand the process, even if experiencing it personally was vastly different. Moving carefully around the house, she gathered the items she would need: clean linens, water, the baby clothes she had prepared. Between contractions, she managed to stoke the fire and light several lamps against the approaching evening. As the pains grew stronger and closer together, Savannah found herself speaking aloud to the child within her. Not yet, little one. Wait for your father, wait for help. But the baby had its own timeline. By the time the sun began to set, Savannah knew she couldn't delay much longer. Lying on their bed, gripping the headboard through each contraction, she prayed fervently for Henry's return, for the baby's safe delivery, for her own strength to endure what was to come. The sound of a horse approaching at speed sent a wave of relief through her. Moments later, the front door burst open and Henry's voice called out, "Savannah, are you home?" "In here," she managed between contractions. "The baby's coming, Henry." He appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock and concern. "Dear God, I knew I shouldn't have left you, Mrs. Patterson said she had a feeling and sent me home to check." "Thank heaven for her instincts," Savannah gasped as another pain seized her. "There's no time for the doctor, you'll have to help me." For a moment, panic flashed across Henry's features, the confident sheriff confronted with a situation beyond his control. Then determination replaced fear. He removed his hat and gun belt, rolled up his sleeves, and approached the bed with the same steady resolve he brought to all challenges. "Tell me what to do," he said simply. Through the longest night of their lives, husband and wife worked together to bring their child into the world. Savannah directed through gritted teeth. Henry followed her instructions with unwavering focus, his hands steady despite his fear. As dawn broke over the Oklahoma prairie, a lusty cry announced the arrival of their son, a healthy, robust boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. "We have a son," Henry whispered in awe as he placed the swaddled infant in Savannah's arms. "Savannah, you did it. You're amazing." Exhausted but radiant, Savannah gazed down at their child. "We did it," she corrected, making room for Henry to sit beside her on the bed. "What shall we name him?" Henry gently touched the baby's tiny hand, his finger immediately captured in a surprisingly strong grip. "How about William? After my father, William Henry Decker," Savannah tested the name, smiling as the baby's eyes opened seemingly in response. "It suits him perfectly." When Dr. Henderson finally arrived later that morning, having been summoned by a neighbor Henry had sent for at first light, he found a scene of domestic tranquility, mother and baby resting comfortably, the new father standing guard over his family with proud vigilance. "Well, well," the doctor said, examining the infant with professional thoroughness. "Looks like you managed just fine without me. Strong little fellow, isn't he?" "Takes after his mother," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "Strongest person I know." As news of William's birth spread through Kingfisher, visitors began arriving with gifts and good wishes. Mrs. Patterson took charge of the household, ensuring Savannah had proper rest while managing the stream of well-wishers. Through it all, Henry remained close, dividing his time between essential sheriff's duties and caring for his wife and son. One evening, as November drew to a close and the first snow dusted their new home, Henry sat beside the fire cradling William while Savannah rested nearby. The peaceful domestic scene was everything he had never dared hope for in the lonely years before she came into his life. "I spoke to Mayor Thompson today," he said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping infant. "Officially submitted my resignation as sheriff, effective the first of the year." Savannah looked up from her needlework, studying his face. "Are you certain that's what you want?" Henry gazed down at his son, then back to his wife. "More certain than I've ever been about anything, except marrying you. Kingfisher needs a sheriff who can give everything to the job." "I need to give everything to you and William." Love swelled in Savannah's heart for this man who had captured her heart in the dusty streets of a frontier town. "What did the mayor say?" He wasn't surprised, Henry admitted with a small smile. "Said he's been expecting it since the day I married you. Deputy Collins will take over. He's ready for the responsibility." Savannah reached across to touch his hand, "And the ranching plans, already in motion. I've arranged to purchase the Johnson property that adjoins ours to the west. By spring, we'll have enough land for a proper cattle operation." His expression grew thoughtful. "It won't be easy at first. We'll be building something from nothing." "We've done that before," Savannah reminded him, gesturing to their home, their son, the life they'd created together. "And look how beautifully it turned out." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Decker family. Henry's transition from lawman to rancher proved smoother than expected, his natural leadership and work ethic serving him well in his new vocation. The Decker ranch grew steadily, eventually becoming one of the most prosperous in the county. Savannah continued her dressmaking business on a smaller scale, working from a dedicated room in their home. Her reputation for quality and style remained, drawing clients from as far as Guthrie and Oklahoma City as the territory developed. William was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, in 1892 and another brother, James, in 1895. The Decker children grew up in the freedom of the Oklahoma prairie, learning the values of hard work and family loyalty from parents who demonstrated both daily. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Kingfisher transformed from a frontier outpost to a proper town. Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, bringing new opportunities and challenges to the region. Through it all, Henry and Savannah remained pillars of their community, he serving on the town council, she active in the church and school. On a warm summer evening in 1914, nearly 25 years after their first meeting, Henry and Savannah sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset as they had countless times before. Their children were grown now, William managing part of the ranch, Elizabeth teaching at the local school, and James studying law in Oklahoma City. "Do you ever miss it?" Savannah asked suddenly, her hand finding Henry's as naturally as breathing. "Being sheriff, I mean." Henry considered the question, his once dark hair now streaked with silver, his face lined by years of outdoor work but his blue eyes still bright and clear. "Sometimes I miss the purpose of it," he admitted. "The feeling of making a difference in such a direct way." He squeezed her hand. "But no, I don't regret the choice. Not for a moment. Everything I've truly valued in my life came after I hung up that badge, our children, this ranch, years of waking up beside you." Savannah leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From that terrifying first day in Kingfisher to this peaceful moment, their journey had been filled with both hardship and happiness. Through it all, the love that had blossomed between a determined dressmaker and a dedicated lawman had only deepened with time. "Do you remember when you were shot and I came to take care of you?" she asked softly. Henry chuckled. "How could I forget? You marched past Dr. Henderson like a general inspecting troops. And that night when I took off my wedding dress. I remember freezing in shock at how beautiful you were," he murmured, his voice growing husky with the memory. "And knowing I was the luckiest man in the territory." Savannah smiled, thinking of all the moments that had followed, some ordinary, some extraordinary, all precious. "We built a good life, didn't we?" "The best," Henry agreed, drawing her closer as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land they had tamed together. "And we're not finished yet, Mrs. Decker, not by a long shot." As darkness settled over the Oklahoma prairie, the house behind them glowed with welcoming light, a beacon of the home and family they had created from nothing but love and determination in the wild heart of America.